from different institutions across Scotland and also the UK. We normally have these sessions, physical meetings, kind of Edinburgh and Glasgow, so we kind of have a more limited range of guests from the kind of local area. So it's really good to be able to open it up a bit more across the UK. And yeah, to colleagues from different departments, as well as kind of procurement sustainability. I know today we've got some people from other teams and departments in institutions. So yeah, it's good for the kind of discussion and to kind of have that mix of guests. So I am just going to run through, I think I know quite a few people from previous kind of meetings. My name's Kate Murray. I'm one of the co-conveners of this topic support network. And my role is in procurement at Queen Margaret University, which is based just near Edinburgh. I'm going to run through today's agenda, which hopefully you have received a copy of, but I'll just do a quick overview of what we're kind of covering today. And then if we normally do just a short kind of little round of introductions, just so just kind of everyone gets to know each other a little bit, but just a kind of a short brief intro. So in terms of the agenda for today, we are going to have, first of all, Rika's the other co-convener for this topic support network and the head of APUC's responsible procurement team. So she is going to look at the Sustain Code of Conduct, which is supply chain code of conduct, which has been adopted by quite widely across the UK institutional kind of sector, and it's recently been kind of redesigned or relaunched. So Rika will talk a bit about the kind of developments with the code of conduct, and following on from that, I am going to we're going to have a bit of a roundtable discussion, so everyone, it's a chance for everyone to kind of contribute their thoughts and opinions. The topic for it will be a recent Scottish procurement policy note, which is covering the themes of kind of climate change, circular economy and procurement. So we'll look a little bit at kind of topics covered in that policy note. I'll do a kind of a little bit of an overview of it for those that aren't familiar with it. And then we've kind of got a couple of discussion points which are included on the agenda. So we'll kind of talk around those. And there's to make it a little bit more interactive, we've got kind of a poll which we'll do as well, as kind of just to get people kind of thinking and talking. And we'll take a break after that roundtable. And then we'll follow on from that with, we'll go back to Rika as well, because she has another sort of some developments in their responsible procurement team, and that is looking at the HESCET tool, which is looking at scope 3, sort of indirect emissions from procurement, and that's also something that's been in place for a little while, but there's recently been quite a few significant developments on that. So Rika will talk quite a bit about what's happened there and the kind of how the new tool can sort of benefit you and what you can get from it. Jill will also give us an update on the work of EAUC within this kind of the Scottish and more widely in the sort of UK sort of offices, and then we'll kind of really just any other business and kind of talk about any ideas for future meetings, any topics of interest. That's kind of the agenda for today. So hopefully, that works for everybody. We hopefully today have plenty of time for discussion, because we slightly rejigged the agenda, so we kind of don't have so much on it as we originally planned. So there's lots of time for people to contribute. So hopefully that works well. I am now going to just, what I'd like to do, just as a sort of very short intro, is just to ask for each kind of guest today to kind of introduce themselves briefly. So basically just, you know, to say your name and the kind of institution or organisation you're representing, and just to tell us sort of one thing that they're working on at the moment. You know, it doesn't have to be directly related to, you know, this sort of to sustainable procurement, but just a project you're working on, a piece of work, you know, a group you're involved in, just to give us a little flavour of kind of what you're looking at the moment. So I have the list of participants here, so I'll just kind of call out each person, and if you want to unmute yourself and say a couple of words, that would be great. So I think, well, Jill, I guess we should still go with you, even though you've kind of talked already just before this, but yeah, if you want to just
sure, I'm happy to start.
Tell us what you're working on.
So I'm Jill from AUC Scotland. One of the main things I do is support organisations with their public bodies climate change duties reporting. So I am waiting for that information to come through from the Scottish Government and TSN at the moment, so that I can start work on the sector analysis. But I've also been setting up the spring round of topic support networks as well.
Okay, thanks, Jill. Rika, if you want to go next.
Sure, thanks. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rika. I'm the head of responsible procurement at EPUC. Currently, I'm basically preparing to going off on maternity leave, which is very exciting. I have another 3 weeks left. And Amy, who might be going after me just next to start, is just doing her kind of getting her up to speed with everything we do at EPUC. And for your information, Steve Connor, who has worked in the development and sustainability team within EPUC before, he's going to be my maternity cover. So you can then get in touch with him from like the beginning of April till about the mid of October this year. Get in touch with him for anything responsible procurement related. Thank you.
Thanks, Rika. Next on my list, Amy Ledger.
Hi guys, I'm Amy, and I'm the new sustainability specialist at APUC. So I'll be helping Rika until she goes, and then I'll be working with Stephen on all things to do with sustainability.
Great, thanks, Amy. Next, Derek, I think it's you. I've got you down as APUC 184, but yeah.
That's correct. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, Derek Cowie. I work for the APUC, but I'm based at Inverness College, part of the UHI. There are 13 partners of the UHI. I've been appointed as a sustainable champion to try and work with the whole partnership, but because of COVID, it's kind of taking a back seat at the moment. But I've got a target for May time. I have to produce a sustainable procurement procedure for Inverness College to go for management approval, and hopefully we'll roll it out to the other partners. So it won't be an Inverness College specific eventually, it'll be a UHI. So I'm part of a shared service team. There's 7 of us in the team led by Amanda McKenzie. And sustainable procurement is high in the agenda. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Derek. Maybe we can briefly pick up on that sustainable procurement policy later and share any ideas and thoughts that other institutions have on that, because I know we've been in contact on that as well.
Yeah.
So we can have a quick chat about that later.
Okay.
Great, so next, Katrina, you're on my list. You're muted, Katrina.
Sorry, see, I was just saying I'm not used to Zoom after being on Teams for so long. I'm Katrina. I'm a current graduate with APUC. So I really wanted to come along today after speaking to Rika and Kate about wanting to get more understanding about sustainable procurement. So yeah, just hoping to learn a lot from you all.
Great, thank you. Next, David St Andrews.
Hi, I'm David Stutchfield. I'm the Sustainability Manager at the University of St Andrews. I'm due to retire in 21 days, but I'm still keen to participate. We're doing a lot of work on Scope 3 procurement carbon, and our carbon footprint boundary includes all of procurement carbon in all our reporting. So sustainable procurement and the embodied carbon within it, and how do we change our procurement processes to allow people to select low carbon solutions is very, very interesting to me at the moment.
Thank you, David. Okay, next I have Fiona Strathclyde. Not sure if you're there, Fiona, or if you're able to unmute yourself. Okay, we'll move on to the next person on the list, Helene Aberdeen.
Hi, yeah, I'm Helene Garnicliffe and I'm Head of Procurement at Aberdeen Uni. I'm on the university's Sustainability Steering Group, which we last year, just before we went into lockdown, we launched our Aberdeen 2040 strategy, and sustainability is an element of that. I've also volunteered for the CPF Monitoring and Reporting Group. Similar to David, we're obviously looking at our Scope 3 emissions and how we can best monitor those and report on those, particularly for the annual report as well, for the annual procurement report as well.
Thanks, Lane. Okay, I next have Jessica on my list. Okay, I'm not sure. Jessica, will come back to you. I'm not sure if.
Hi, sorry.
There you are.
I'm here. Just give me 1 second. I'll just. Oh, here we go. It's starting. Can you see me? Oh, hi. Sorry, I'm a bit late to the party. Are we just introducing ourselves?
Yeah, just basically to say which institution you're representing, and just a piece of work that you're doing right now, or a project you have on.
So hi, Jessica Mattershaw. I'm a senior buyer at Lancaster University and I lead on facilities, but also a member of the Responsible Procurement Group, which is Kate kindly sent over the invite. So from a sustainability point of view, I'm hoping to lead, well, I'm leading on the Scope 3 emissions reporting. So I'm looking at sustainability as a whole. So we're quite slow. It's starting to gain traction. So hoping to just learn from all these different groups that are around, listening and trying to just understand what other areas are doing to help us try and drive sustainability, social value and carbon reduction as a whole.
Thank you, Jessica. Next, let me see where I'm on my list. Kath at Ayrshire College.
Yeah, good morning everyone. Yeah, Kath Harper, Procurement Manager at Ayrshire College. I've sort of got the role of sustainability at the moment. That would normally be with the Estates and Sustainability Manager, but they haven't had somebody in that position for over a year now. So you can understand sustainability is rather taking a back seat. However, managed to get the sustainability group to meet yesterday. Obviously in light of all the new legislation and everything that we're going to be discussing. So that was good news. And a project I'm working on, which is quite interesting, is we have a hydro electric project on the River Aire down at our Aire campus that will connect up and supply electricity into that. So working through the terms and conditions, etc., that all go with that. But that should be quite an interesting thing. And it's being funded by the Energy Agency, what they call themselves, Energy Agency Renewables Limited, who are also based down in Aire. So it's going to be quite interesting just to see how much electricity we're able to source that way rather than the standard through the normal national agreements. So that's the main thing at the moment.
Thanks, Kath. Okay, next I have Lucy Stewart.
Hi, good morning everyone. So yeah, my name is Lucy and I am one of the Sustainability Programme Officers at the University of Leeds. so another one from south of the Scottish border. So I work within the sustainability service, but I work very closely with our procurement team. One of my main programs of work is really driving our sustainable procurement agenda forwards. Sort of last year, we updated the sustainable procurement standard. We did have one before that, but it was definitely time for a refresh. We had to get both of our teams back engaged and working together. And then so off the back of the standard, I'm now aiming to develop a procedure to go with it to accompany the standard, to really be the really practical on the ground how we're going to roll this out. And I've been doing a really great consultation with the procurement team recently, spoken to all of those and got some really good ideas, and we've worked together on that. So the next step is us to really roll it out together, which is good.
Thanks, Lucy. Okay, so I think we've got a few new attendees just joined us. Where are we? Okay, after Lucy, we'll come back to people that just joined us, I guess, at the end. I've got Martin now at Edinburgh College on the list.
Hi there. Well, yeah, Martin Webb from Edinburgh College, Sustainability Officer. One project I'm working on was delivery of our environmental sustainability strategy. So it's about 50 projects really, but procurement sits under that. And I guess for me, it's about trying to find out where it sits with our public bodies reporting, because we haven't really got anywhere with in terms of the emissions data yet. But there's a lot seemingly happening. So I'm kind of watching this space. That's it.
Thanks, Martin. Okay, next, Peter Finch.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, Peter Finch, I'm Deputy Head of Procurement down at the University of Surrey. Firstly, thank you for extending the invite south of the border. It's good to see certainly new faces as well. This came up from the Responsible Procurement Group. There's a lot going on at Surrey from a sustainability point of view. I think we're probably late to the party, but sprinting to catch up is probably the best description. I revamped the sustainable procurement policy at the back end of last year, or it took quite a process. It was quite painful getting through the executive board, who decided to smash the procurement policy and the sustainable procurement policy together. So they are one and the same now, which is, in my view, good. My next task is to work on the sustainable construction policy, which will attach onto that. One of the biggest projects we've got on the go at the moment is I'm leading on the procurement of a delivery partner for on-site renewable energy generation, which we've got some land earmarked for. We're just building the tender documents as it stands at the moment, which is probably going to take up most of my next 12 months, I would have thought.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, next is Scott at Strathclyde.
Morning, everyone. My name's Scott Bryson. I am the Waste and Environmental Compliance Officer at University of Strathclyde. Sit within the sustainability team within the Estates Department. At the moment, we're primarily, me and my team are looking at Scope 3 procurement-related carbon emissions. We're coming at it from the point of view of looking at almost a top 10 impact areas. From that, we're hoping to identify areas that have probably received less attention. We've already got a lot of work going on in construction, transport and energy related emissions. So we're looking at what other areas can we start to address and start to build more sustainable procurement routes, but also looking at how we can minimise those impacts. So that's the piece of work we're doing just now. That's based mostly around the HESKIT tool. So as a starting point, and then from there contacting suppliers directly. So it's an interesting piece of work, mammoth piece of work. So yeah, really keen to hear what everybody else is working on as well.
Thanks, Scott. Okay, and next, Sharon at Fife College. I'm not sure if you're able to hear us, Sharon, or unmute yourself. If not, I'll move on.
Kate, I am here. I'm just, I've never used Zoom calls before, so apologies that I can't get my video working because the more button keeps popping up over the top of it. Nobody else had that problem. Feel like an idiot. The Fife College is doing a construction project for a new campus this year, so and it's obviously going to run for several years. So that's really the biggest project that's on the go at the moment, that is going to focus quite significantly on sustainability, both in its construction methodology and materials, but also in the building operations once it's completed. Other than that, I'm kind of in the same boat as everybody else, waiting to see what's happening as to how we can best report the carbon, because that is clearly something that is highly important and needs to be done in a consistent way, and how that can be done to best effect, we're still waiting to find out. So keen to see how that progresses.
Thanks, Sharon. Okay, next, Stephen Turnbull.
Good morning, everyone. I'm a procurement business partner for Zero Waste Scotland, and most of the projects that I'm dealing with are not on the scale that you guys are dealing with, but it's supporting the food waste reduction targets, projects to do with that, and policy and research with the circular economy bill and some of the sustainability there. And the other part of my job is to update our templates and our internal governance so that sustainable procurement is actually embedded in there and considered by others, because despite the fact that we're an environmental organisation, it's not necessarily considered within our contracts other than being an output. So we want them to start thinking more about how they do that sort of thing. So interested in how others build that into their contracts, etc.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay, next, Susan at South Lanarkshire College.
Sorry, New College Lanarkshire.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. I wondered if Sue was on as well. Yeah, Susan Gothard. I'm a supply chain manager at New College Lanarkshire. Just starting to have a look at sort of sustainability, and I think with the new policy note that came out, and trying to understand better what that means for the college and what we need to do. They are kind of putting a new strategy in place at the moment, which is very much focused on sort of social justice. I'm not quite sure how much they're taking into account for sustainability at the moment. And I need to try and identify the right people to try and speak to about that as well. So just to get more of an overview of what's going on and how I can then take that back and implement it.
Thanks, Susan. Great. I think there were just one or two people have joined since we started the introductions. So I'll just jump back if you want to introduce yourself, or just say a couple of words about something you're working on. I think, Deborah, did we get to you earlier? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Deborah messaged say she's having problems with her computer, so I don't know if she's
okay.
To unmute herself.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, Deborah, we can skip you. I think Eleanor, I think we missed you earlier.
Hi, yeah, sorry for the scary face. I'm helping with testing on campus, so I'll try and keep my camera off. Hi, I am Eleanor from Bournemouth Uni. I work in the sustainability team, which is also based in the States. Very similar to everyone else, trying to work out our scope 3 emissions. Procurement's a big part of that, particularly where possible in the sector, moving less away from cost-based analysis. We're also doing a life cycle analysis about asking suppliers questions to mark them on environmental standards, and making this as efficient as possible, but also effective, so we can actually influence what they do and mark what they do. And thirdly, social value is something we're trying to tackle with how to measure that and encourage that within suppliers. So they're kind of 3 key things going on our end.
Great, thank you, Eleanor. I think, is there anyone else that's didn't get a chance to introduce themselves? I think we've covered everybody. Please just unmute yourself just now and introduce yourself if I've missed you earlier. If not, then we can move over to Rika is going to do her bit of a presentation on the Sustain Supply Chain Code of Conduct. So Rika, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Kate. Hi everyone. Really interesting to hear what everyone's working on, and I hope I can get back to some of you as well. I'm trying to share my screen. Hopefully that is not going to fail me right now. Okay, right, perfect. I think you can hopefully see all now.
Yes.
A wee presentation on the Sustained Supply Chain Code of Conduct, just for context. So that has been updated just there in February. The last version came out. That's why it's called 2021B. I'm not sure where the B comes from, but that's what we're going to go with. So Sustained Supply Chain Code of Conduct version 2021B. Oh, there we go. So the previous version was agreed in March 2020, which is not too long ago, but we wanted to make sure that we do a bit of minor updates to the code of conduct, especially as other UK UPC consortia have shown interest in using it, and we wanted to make sure that they had a chance to feed back to the code prior to adoption, so that they can basically say what they maybe want to include or where they're not happy with. So we gave them the chance. I'm part of a UK UPC Responsible Procurement Networking Group, which I chaired up until just there. And we discussed it in the group and then provided feedback, which had then been taken into account. So overall, this has now been agreed, and the other consortia have also agreed to adopt it, and I will start rolling it out. Just to kind of, without going into the detail of it, because I think Jill, you've included the link as well on the agenda, and I've also included a couple of links in the presentation, which I'm sure you will get after this event, to kind of get access to it and read it in detail. The changes that have been made is mostly that we've changed the wording from suppliers shall comply, etc., to must. Now the shall came from, I believe, from the SA 1000. SA 1000 says that suppliers shall do X, Y, and Z, which is kind of defined the shall as must as a compliance requirement. Now, as this isn't clear in the code of conduct, we changed it from shall to must to make it a bit clearer. We also then improved the readability of the clauses. So some of the clauses didn't quite read in regards to social compliance, suppliers must, and so forward. It didn't read as well, so we changed a little bit of that without changing the actual content within the clause. We did add a clause on water because that was important to one of the members, and the most significant update is in regards to the climate change clause, which I will come to in a second. Just to kind of discuss or present the code of conduct, there's been a bit of confusion with the preamble. So the preamble starts with, we are committed to carrying out procurement activities in an environmentally, socially, and economically responsible manner, and to entering into agreements and contracts with suppliers that share and adhere to our vision. Now the we is really there to give you the chance, if you adopt the code or if you use the code and you want to make a slight change, to put in your organization's name. So you can then say, in APUC's way would be APUC are committed to carrying out, or you might want to say University of Stirling are committed to carrying out, etc. So the we is just standing for the organization that is issuing the Sustained Supply Chain Code of Conduct as part of their activities. Important here is that within the preamble, we quite clearly state to our suppliers that the standard in this course are derived from the established global conventions and standards, so including the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the HCI Base Code, and ILO conventions, meaning this goes beyond UK legal requirements. This is supposed to be international, so we're not stipulating it to be UK. We're really going international and wider than the UK legal requirements. That's quite important to keep in mind when I'm going to give you a wee snippet of what the Section 2 supply chain evaluation tool is looking like. At the very back of it, I don't want to run over time too much, but I just want to give you a quick view on that as well. The next part then is just the commitment from the suppliers to adhere to the Sustained Supply Chain Code of Conduct, but as well that they're asking to do this throughout their supply chain, even though we're only really looking at our suppliers. We're kind of asking them to then make this a requirement within their supply chains. The areas that are covered in the Code of Conduct are social compliance, very importantly, and also like working environment, so health and safety, but also working terms. So in regards to say handing in a notice, and if they're the notice periods, etc. Ethical compliance and economic development, also very important. So in regards to fair trade and ethical contract terms, and lastly, environmental compliance. That's where then our climate change come into account as well as targets. As mentioned before, the most significant change to the old Code of Conduct was the change within the Global Climate and Ecological Emergency Clause, which is the last one. Now, we, I believe, had never had a problem with this clause, the way it was written. However, some of the consortia who are now adopting it, or who are adopting it now and rolling it out, for them, some of the clauses contents was a bit too aspirational. Now, we want to be aspirational, we need to be aspirational. However, they felt like we need to really make sure that we're not being hypocrites. We're not asking suppliers to do something that some of the institutions who are using the Code of Conduct are not actually doing themselves. So with the help of an academic, and I think it was Helen Baker, so thank you very much for that, Helen, we kind of developed this new clause that is a bit, it's still aspirational, but it's not as harsh, it's not as you must do this, it's more of a like, we ask you to support our institutions in their goals. So it reads, higher education and further education institutions are increasingly setting ambitious targets encompassing all three scopes, so 1, 2, and 3, of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, often specifying 2030 as the net zero target, and require their suppliers to support them in this task. Now, again, 2030, that's the aspirational target, that's not the legal target, it's like an aspirational, and some institutions have taken the 2030 target on, others have a target that is a bit later. So important here, the supplier must support the aims of the sectors in reducing the climate emission impact of their supply chains, including having clear and verifiable plans and actions in place where to do this so is reasonable and proportionate to the nature of the goods and services provided. So again, depending on the contract you're in, proportionality and reasonable approach is important. I hope everyone is happy with that. I think it was quite contested at the time, the old clause, and everyone seemed quite happy with this one. Lastly, the Code of Conduct ends with the supplier commitment. So the undersigned, acting as a representative of the company, hereby commit to responsible sustainable procurement and confirm that the company adheres to the Sustained Supply Chain Code of Conduct and shall ensure its supply chain adheres to this Code of Conduct as well, in order to promote sound social, ethical, and environmental and economic practices. This really is for them to sign and to send back as part of the tender. That's what they often do. They're required to, at APUC, to sign it and send it back prior to award. So they don't necessarily have to do that if they're just part of the tender response, but they are then, if they have been appointed prior to going into contract, they have to send that back. Again, as mentioned before, I've included 2 links, so where to find it at the APUC website, but also on the Sustainability Exchange hosted by EAUC. So briefly, again, very briefly, mindful of time, to the supply chain evaluation tool, previously known as Sustain. Now, this has now been changed, to kind of take away a little bit the connection. There was some confusion about, if we're using the Sustained Supply Chain Code of Conduct, we are expected to also use this Sustain Supply Chain Evaluation tool. Now, that's not the case. The supply chain evaluation tool is based partly on the Sustain Supply Chain Code of Conduct, but the one doesn't need to go with the other, so they are independent from each other. So now, as we are kind of managing the process through SCM, we are calling it the SCM Responsible Procurement Section 2, because there's a Section 1 as well. Section 2 Supply Chain Evaluation Tool, or short SCM RP Section 2, but still seems quite long. Overall, it's just to be seen as a due diligence tool with a social audit theme. I'll come to the social audit part in a second. Important to note is that we are not using the sustain.ac.uk website anymore, so that's dead. If you make any references to that Sustain portal, sustain.ac.uk portal, please remove that from your website or your documentation, because now suppliers are asked to use, or they're invited to use, the University and College Supplier portal, the UCSP, to respond to Section 1 and Section 2 queries, and not the Sustain tool anymore. As mentioned, it's all linked through the SCM system. The SCM system is going back to Hunter. So all information on Hunter needs to be up to date to then be reflected within the SCM system, which is like a contract management tool and works quite well. What we're using is for the evaluation tool itself is called the Sustain Equiano question set. You might remember that we had about 322 questions in the old Sustain assessment. Now that's down to 40. Which is a very big relief for anyone on the supplier side and the buyer side, to look at quite a limited number of questions. And we've made it that we are now asking suppliers to be very, very specific about where we can find the evidence. So the Sustain Equiano question set is based on the LUPC's Equiano question set and the Sustain Supply Chain Code of Conduct. Now, again, partly under Sustain Supply Chain Code of Conduct. Now, as a reminder, the Sustain Supply Chain Code of Conduct is based on requirements within the UN Global Compact, ETI Base Code, and the ILO Core Conventions, reaching beyond the legal UK requirements. That's quite important to remember, because we have questions and requirements within the assessment that are higher than the UK legal requirement. For one, as we're not just working with UK suppliers, but also because we really want to make sure that we are pushing towards the best practice here. So an example is, for example, maternity cover. Now, it's quite a topical topic for me. The UK legal requirement is only 6 weeks of 90% of your pay. Now, the ILO Core Convention law is much higher. It's like 13 weeks and 90% of your pay. So suppliers are obviously, for financial reasons, often just adhering to the UK legal requirement if they're based in the UK, meaning they would not hit like the best mark or score in the assessment, and we would work with them to make them understand why it would be better to go and be compliant with the ILO conventions. And this is in general the theme. We are expecting suppliers to be legally compliant, but we're querying within the assessment how further along they are on the best practice path. So we are then taking all of the suppliers' scores, which is on like not a pass fail, it's more of a red, amber, green. So how well are you doing on this kind of path? And we're going to take them forward through the contract management process and kind of explain to them why it would be better to be to apply better practice. I mentioned it's basically a due diligence process with a social audit theme. So just to kind of make clear what I mean with that, the social audit definition is, so social audit is a way of measuring, understanding, reporting, and ultimately improving on an organization's social and ethical performance. So the social audit helps then to narrow the gaps between the vision or the goal and the reality, between efficiency and effectiveness. So it's technique to understand, measure, verify, report on, and to improve the social performance of the organization. We're not saying you're good or you're bad. We're just saying there's some things you can do a bit better. And that's really the whole process. If you ever come across a red, it doesn't mean they're not doing something. It just might mean that they haven't been able to provide evidence, or that they haven't quite hit the mark in the way you need them to respond. So again, it's not pass-fail, it's a red, amber, green. It's visualizing the supplier's journey towards best practice. And we will follow up on anything that is red or amber within the contract management process with the guidance procedure. Just a quick view on how it looks like. So this is the SCM view. We have here Alpha Marketing, which I've been working on. They've successfully completed it. Very, very happy with their responses, and you can invite them through the SCM tool, and you can go to the profile, which is section 1, and sustain. There's still old terminology here, apologies for that, and section 2, which is like the sustain area. The supplier is getting an invite to the UCSP portal, which is this kind of view. We've asked all the EPUC suppliers to fill out section 1, and obviously like the high risk ones, and throughout the kind of first kind of process where we're kind of testing processes for section 2, those people will be invited and then get access to section 2. It's divvied up in different sections, so we're looking at workers' rights, young workers' rights, remuneration, working hours, health and safety, dispute resolution, equality, diversity, ethical business, environmental practices. Separately, and we have one base where they can upload files on the system, and we can download that then. Important to note here is that it's called a questionnaire, but it's not really a question, it's like statements, and they have to say whether or not they're compliant. So here, for example, is workers are free to terminate their employment on reasonable notice, i.e. the employer has to terminate the employment relationship in the same kind of terms. They then have to confirm whether or not this is the case, yes or no, and for information only at this stage, to say whether or not they're asking this of the supply chain. And the difference here now to the old system is that rather than just saying yes or no and uploading some evidence that then the verifier has to find themselves, we are saying, right, you have to make a statement here. You have to, in the text box on the left bottom corner, you have to provide a clear statement on notice arrangements for all types of workers and the notice the employer gives to them. And you also have to provide evidence, which you have to name 1.2, very important. So you can then, as a verifier, say, right, I'm going into 1.2, and they told me on paragraph 15, I can see this is the notice period. And then you verify it, you put a validated response in, and that goes back to the supplier. Process really is that it takes 3 months, but rather than being a tender process where you send out the tender, you might have some clarifications in a process, and then you get a tender response and take it as it is. You might have a clarification or 2, but you're quite limited on clarifications. Here you have the process of the supplier looks at it for 6 to 8 weeks, responds to you, and then you validate it and send it back with comments. So the supplier then can come back, ask questions, and then you have another 4 to 6 weeks period where you really just go back and forth with the supplier until there is like the 3-month period is kind of over, and you say, listen, these are the things that you still have to improve, and we'll take that through the contract management process. But for now, this is quite a good score, or we're quite happy with it. Or maybe you're not quite happy with it, but you can then have the basis to talk to the supplier about it. And just to make things short, because I know I've been talking quite a long time, apologies for that. I'm still here until the end of the month, and then Steve Corner is going to take over my maternity cover. And Amy obviously joined joined last week. But she will also be responsible for some of the section 2 elements. So if you want to get in touch, any questions now or later, happy to respond to any, and I hope that was okay. Back to you, Kate, I think. Or if anyone has any questions just now, sorry, I've just rattled through there.
Yeah, thank you, Rika. Yeah, I was just going to ask, is anyone have any questions they'd like to ask just now? There's one in the chat. Rika, from David at St Andrews, asking, how's the SCM requirement written into procurement documents?
So we are including that as a standard, like we had previously, we had in our tender documents and final procurement documents. Yeah, let me quite quickly find the actual wording. We included in there that we might ask our suppliers to participate in the process. So it's not a must, it's a might. And I would say to any of the contract managers who are starting to invite suppliers that they are actually checking with their supply base first if they're available to do it. So the wording we're using is on being appointed to the framework agreement, the contractors will be encouraged to nominate a sustainable procurement representative, and that will be the main point of contact within the authority. And they also are encouraged to participate in the authority's sustainable supply chain audit program. So that's that section 2, to determine their compliance with the code of conduct. This will involve completion of an online assessment questionnaire, provision of documentary evidence, and facilitating potential site visits by the authority or a nominated third party to assess site compliance. And then just as a second point, the authority is carrying out a supply chain audit program on behalf of its client institutions, so yourselves, in order to assess the social, ethical, economic, and environmental compliance of its suppliers and supply chain, and will seek to eliminate poor non-compliant practice and exploit good practice opportunities where possible. Doesn't mean that they will chuck anyone out, but it's just basically they are encouraged to participate in the authority's supply chain program. Does it make sense, David, or do you have any follow-up question on that?
I'm just wanting to check,
Mm-hmm.
Do we do that anyway? Does Adrian do that, or is this another requirement that I can put on and ask our procurement to do?
You mean in the sense of including this clause?
Yes.
Well, by using the framework agreements, the clause already in there.
Okay.
For local contracts, you could potentially start putting it in there, but we haven't quite rolled out the tool yet for institutions to use. We will do that because it's obviously a tool for the sector. But we are just at this kind of stage where we are still making like the final adjustments so it works well, and Amy and Steve are going to be trained up to use it this week and the following week, and the champions have just been trained. So they will take through their own framework agreement suppliers going forward. It does take a wee bit of time, so we just have to be mindful and which suppliers we're going to invite first, etc. Because it's free to use, which is great, but suppliers are also needing to see a benefit. So the benefit here is for suppliers to develop themselves, to understand what the sector requires, but also to maybe be able to showcase to the sector that they are a good supplier. So they will want to use it, to want to do it, want to develop. But yes, so there is still a few things to kind of iron out, but ideally, for now, it's just part of the framework agreements.
Great. Okay, one more question in the chat just now from Lucy. Is this process bespoke to APUC, or is it available more widely? So the portal, for the SCM portal.
It's not bespoke to APUC. I think the other consortia can use it, and some of them are already signed up. That's something that eSolutions is managing. So it's definitely something we are intending to opening up, as in that it's not just APUC, but it would go through the consortia. So if anyone is interested, it would probably be easy to just send me an email and I can forward it on and see how I can, liaise between parties that would work with that.
Great, thanks. And just to say on that, actually, I think Stephen in the eSolutions team, there's some discussion on organising demos, I think, at the moment. So I'm not sure how widely they're able to do demos to institutions or consortia across the UK. But maybe if you're interested in that, Rika, would it be best to drop you an email and you could speak to Stephen? Okay, great. So if anyone is interested in a demo of this tool, the portal, please get in touch with Rika. And another question then, so how are, I think from Lucy again, so how are other institutions using the Sustained Supply Chain Code of Conduct? I can see how I use it quickly. at Queen Margaret Uni, we basically include it for our when we go out to tender for all our regulated procurements. So for us in Scotland, everything over 50,000. So we include that as an attachment for potential bidders to review and send back and sign. And it's, I mean, at the moment, I guess partly it's kind of kept on file. We need to kind of more proactively use it in terms of probably the kind of contract management that hasn't really been fully kind of implemented. But it's, yeah, so it's used at that kind of initial stage of going out to tender. I don't know about anyone else if they use it more kind of comprehensively or in a different way.
I think generally speaking, on a local contracting stage, as you say, for regulated procurements and maybe even for lower spend contracts as well, depending on the size of the institutions. It is available for anyone to use, of course, and it does give you some level of protection if you've asked your supply chain to adhere to the code of conduct. So that's quite useful as well. Again, like, we never had a problem with a supplier necessarily coming back and saying this is not really what we want to sign up for, or can we discuss this? At least not has anything come to my attention. So generally speaking, as we're not asking for anything which is, which shouldn't be a level of standard, maybe not the high standard that maybe everyone is adhering to just now, it usually doesn't come back with any negativity.
Great, okay, thanks Rika. Does anyone have any more comments or questions on Rika's presentation or any of those topics?
Well, for Inverness College, we issue the document with every tender package, regardless if it's regulated or non-regulated. It's a standard a document that goes out, and it's well used. Every successful tenderer who gets a local contract or a caller from a framework, they do sign the document and we get signed copies back. So I think from the Highlands side, it's been well received and well used.
Great, thank you, Derek. Yeah, and a comment from Sharon at Fife College just here to say that you use it at Fife College in your new supplier forms that go out to anyone that I guess that's going onto the finance system. So all purchase orders go to suppliers that have already signed up to the code of conduct. So yeah, that's obviously very yeah, that's kind of the next level, I guess, of kind of including it not just for your tenders and your regulated kind of procurements, but for pretty much, I guess, everything that goes through the finance system, which will be the vast majority of things, I suppose. Okay, that's really interesting comments. Okay, I think I'm going to suggest then we maybe take a break now. We had a kind of 10-minute break scheduled after the roundtable, but I think it's probably best if we just take the break now and we can kind of come back. So it's 5 to 11 now. So if we come back at 5 past 11, and then we can move on to the sort of roundtable discussion. Great, thank you everyone. Okay, I think, yeah, we'll probably move on now. I know sometimes it's hard to tell if everyone is back when cameras are off, but I'm assuming that people are, yeah, listening in, so that's absolutely fine if you want to keep your camera off. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so I am going to do the kind of next bit of the agenda, which is looking at Scottish procurement policy note, which was included in the agenda that was sent out, but it is a bit long. It's about 10 pages, so I appreciate not everyone's had the time to kind of really kind of have a look at that. Some of you may already be familiar with the kind of content of it, but I will kind of take a few minutes just to give a little bit of a run through of what that kind of covers. And then the point really is it's not really a presentation, it's just a little bit of a kind of informal overview. And then we will have yeah, a roundtable discussion. So it's really just yeah, a chance for people to give their thoughts on the themes you know, within that kind of policy note, which, you know, touch on quite a few kind of topics. It's quite broad actually, and there's a couple of like very simple kind of polls to get people's thoughts, so we'll kind of put them up on the screen and try and get a sort of answer response from people today. So yeah, the policy notes then, which we're talking about, is a recent one, just came out just this year in the last month or so, and it's specifically looking at kind of the linkages between climate change, circular economy and procurement. So just I know some people on the call are from other parts of the UK, so probably don't really get the kind of Scottish procurement policy notes. So they're similar to the procurement policy notes that are put out by the UK government, but these are additional ones that that we receive, Scottish kind of public sector receive, to talk about kind of Scottish legislative policy developments, particularly in relation to yeah, procurement policy, of course. I mean, Scotland has obviously, you know, has been kind of following as the same as the rest of the UK, kind of this sort of EU procurement regulations, but additionally there is legislation that relates just to kind of Scottish public sector bodies. So as we kind of mentioned earlier, for example, we look at regulated procurements as anything over 50,000 kind of contract value. And there's some specific wording in the kind of Scottish procurement legislation around the sustainable procurement duty. And that's basically, the essence of that is to ask all public sector bodies to consider social, environmental and economic well-being of its kind of the area in which the organisation operates, and that's something that's kind of to be considered and taken into account for all regulated procurements. So this particular policy note, the background to it, which we kind of briefly, sort of Rika touched on a bit in her presentation, is, you know, there's a big emphasis obviously across you know, worldwide, you know, on the kind of climate ecological sort of emergency. In Scotland, for example, there was this new forum that was set up, the Climate and Procurement Forum, set up you know, in the last sort of year or so, kind of try and help move this agenda forward on, so in this case, looking at the kind of how, you know, procurement and climate change sort of policy work together, and how kind of each can benefit the other. So this particular policy note kind of is an output from this forum. I think Rika and some other members that are on the call today are part of this forum in one way or another, and there's different kind of strands to the work, but this policy note was one of the outputs, and it's kind of comes on the back of a couple of other developments in Scotland that are looking to strengthen the sort of social and environmental policy, basically. So one, a few people have sort of been talking about Scope 3 emissions, and we'll kind of talk about that a bit more later. And there's been a bit of a change on the reporting for that. So now in the public bodies climate change duties report, there's a requirement to look at targets as well for Scope 3 emissions, as well as Scope 1 and 2. So that's something that's just happened really, I think, in the last few months. There's been communication on that. So that's kind of a little bit of the background to, I guess it's kind of a trend towards sort of strengthening policy in this area and giving more guidance to public sector bodies on not just reporting requirements, but kind of how to look sort of strategically at the issues of sort of climate change. You know, in this case, kind of focusing on procurement. So this policy note is, as I said, it's quite broad. It's normally a lot of policy notes, I suppose, are quite specific. They're maybe a bit technical or related to specific sort of procurement areas. This particular note is quite, it's a bit of a, I would say maybe like a bit of a departure on the normal policy notes, because it's very wide ranging and it's quite ambitious in what it's asking for public sector bodies to do. Not like it's really kind of looking at the whole ways of working and how organisations sort of communicate internally and work across departments. So it's really kind of asking for public sector bodies to think quite big in terms of how they look at sort of climate change and circular economy and procurement. And so a few, I'm kind of, please feel free to kind of read it in your, you know, at your leisure. I'll kind of highlight a couple of the points that are sort of that come up in this policy notes, and we can, you know, talk more about them in this sort of discussion. So one of the points, as I kind of mentioned, yeah, they're asking, so this is written, I mean, they're written kind of normally for procurement teams to kind of take on board, and they're normally quite targeted, I suppose, at staff working in a sort of procurement or supply chain role. This policy note is asking for sort of really cross kind of departmental or cross organisation working. So it's saying that procurement teams should work with budget holders and senior leaders more extensively on climate change. You know, they're kind of saying climate change is such a big issue. It can't kind of be, you know, it can't be looked at just in isolation in different departments. It really needs to be kind of talked about and discussed, you know, very broadly across institutions. So that's kind of they put quite a lot of emphasis on that point within the document. Another point that's kind of highlighted, I guess, is saying that staff, sort of procurement managers, needs to, I guess, broaden and kind of increase their knowledge of climate change and circular economy, and how that like links into procurement. So, you know, that's not necessarily kind of, you know, knowledge that, you know, staff will have in their kind of normal training, but it's something that this policy note is really emphasising as important, to kind of have that bigger knowledge. So a couple of things that the Scottish Government have done recently, and we'll kind of look at that later, to try and help with this sort of awareness raising. One is that a new set of online tools that were kind of launched last summer, the sustainable procurement tools. Some of you are familiar with this or previous versions of them. They've kind of been revamped and relaunched, and there's an emphasis in this document on asking people to kind of really use these and kind of get a bit more knowledge on the topics and the specific sort of areas of sort of environmental, policy and how they link to specific procurement exercises. And another point is very recent actually, is there's a new training which we'll talk about more, that's been published or sort of made available to procurement staff and perhaps more widely as well, in carbon literacy. So that's another kind of an awareness raising or kind of point. So let me just check. Okay, another kind of theme, I suppose, that comes up in the policy note is talking about procurement teams needing to work more with its supply chain, really, to kind of understand how where the kind of real risk areas are for kind of carbon emissions, or the hotspots. So we're like actually talking really with your supply base and finding out where identifying those kind of hotspots, and talking, really having a conversation about how to tackle emissions, and kind of looking at target dates for reducing emissions as well. So it's sort of asking, I think, people to think, bigger than simply kind of reporting. Like, as we kind of know, the HESCET tool offers a way to report carbon emissions based on spend levels. But this policy note is also saying, more needs to be done in really kind of getting behind the figures, and understanding, where the opportunities are and how to kind of tackle them. And yeah, various, there's quite a few other things that kind of come up in the document, but I'm kind of conscious of time. So just to kind of maybe wrap up on that, yeah, maybe the last requirement to say, which is asking, the Scottish Government's really asking public sector bodies in their sort of annual procurement strategies and procurement reports to include, comments and how climate change and circular economy is being considered in their procurement process. So that's kind of a new requirement, which I think will come into place probably for a lot of organisations for around July time, when the strategy is published. And there's kind of a lot more, within that document, but it'd be good to kind of, hear your thoughts about some of those themes, and if you've had a chance to read any other themes that you think are quite striking within the document, and also to hear, is this something that you've already maybe started to kind of look at within your organisation with your role, or how do you think you can, take it on board? So I included in the agenda, there were a few ideas for discussion themes, but please feel free to kind of comment on anything that you think is interesting within that policy note. We do have, just to kind of open it up, we have a poll. We'll see if this works. The first I included, oh, here we go. Okay, the poll has popped up. So yeah, please, it's just a simple yes no, really, to kind of gauge your thoughts. So this is really looking at sort of ideas for circular economy and procurement, I guess, talking about whether goods can be hired instead of bought, can things be remanufactured or redesigned instead of bought new. So if you have a chance, if you have a comment on that, yes or no, do you have a process for this? When you're going out to tender, do you have a process for considering alternatives? So if everyone has had a chance to answer that, can we, how does that work? Oh, we've got the answers now already. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, yeah. So if everyone can see those poll results, we basically got 25% do have a clear process for considering alternatives, and 75% don't. I think that's not surprising really, because it's quite challenging, I think, to kind of put that process in place. But it's kind of a theme that's sort of coming out in this policy note, and I don't know if there's been similar sort of communications, you know, by other sort of government departments about how to look at that. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on, you know, anyone that does have a clear process that answered, you know, what is their process, if they want to say anything about that, that would be interesting. Or if anyone has got challenges in trying to put that in place, I'd be kind of interested to hear your thoughts.
So just jumping quickly there, as far as I'm aware, and I really hope I'm not doing any of my procurement colleagues a complete disservice here, I don't think we have any system currently in place. I know that when departments are looking to buy, for example, furniture, the procurement department will try and point them towards, we have a sort of storage facility where furniture is moved to on decants and things like that. It tends to become a bit of a dumping ground. So at the moment I'm looking at trying to bring in Warpit to do a complete inventory of everything that's there, and then build an inventory management system with portering to make sure that going forward we know exactly what's there at all times. It'll be held for reuse for a certain period of time depending on the item, and then we can look at handing out to charities, third sector organisations, other institutions, for example. Which is great for furniture surplus that we've already got. But one of the things that we're keen to do is look at hiring instead of buying new furniture at all, particularly around, for example, exam desks that are only going to be used once a year. Does anybody have any experience with, in particular, hiring of furniture from organisations? I think it's Arco that are probably one of our primary suppliers for furniture. It's such an early stage that I'm not too sure what's actually available out there on the market for temporary hire or long-term hire of furniture.
Is there anyone that has any suggestions for Scott on that? I don't personally, but is there anyone else that has comments?
I would comment, first of all, Scott, that's a brilliant idea. And I think furniture is one of these things where going forward with blended learning and changes to potentially the institutional environment, there will be a lot of surplus furniture potentially. And I think institutions really need to start looking at it now, before the summer comes and before the students potentially coming back for the term in early autumn. And I don't have any experience with that. I don't think from memory that the furniture framework agreement that EPUC is leading has the scope to hire. They definitely have a scope for you know, circular economy aspects, upcycling, etc., and remanufacture. But I know that's not what you're necessarily asking. You're asking for a hiring service. But again, it might be worth having that conversation with the wider sector just to see what, you know, if there are other people as well interested. And again, as you say, like, bring the question out to the open. Has anyone got any experience with that? So if you get in touch with me, I'm happy to ask. Oh, Peter is putting his hand up. So
yeah, just as comment, really. I mean, you're really talking about furniture as a service, which is a novel idea, and I haven't come across it certainly down this way. One thing we did do, I think it's an evolution, and because of the changing circumstances we've got at the moment, we're now talking about an incredible surplus of furniture, where, you know, 12 months ago we were talking about a shortage of space. You know, things are very different, and I think the thinking here is that, you know, once we get back to some sort of normality, if you can call it that, you know, within 6 or 9 months we'll know what the new normal will look like and what the demands are in terms of the infrastructure and facilities within that. One thing we did do though, we let our own furniture framework across all sort of office space and accommodation and so on, but we put in their environmental credentials that, you know, that each supplier had to be compliant with, and this is in the recycling and the recovery of the furniture. That's kind of the first step, but I really do like the idea of furniture becoming a service as opposed to a commodity. I think that's a really good thing to push for, I think.
Yeah, I think that's maybe trying to fly before we can crawl here. I mean, maybe the first step would be looking purely at a sort of take back scheme at the end of life, just to make sure, almost like a same sort of extended responsibility for producers. It's ultimately furniture that's come from them. Can they provide some high grade recycling or remanufacture, refurbishing service? I mean, even that would be a step better than we've currently got, where I'd say 98% of all furniture at the end of life probably ends up in a skip somewhere. And even in the States, we probably don't even find out about it. It'll be departments clearing out themselves that will just chuck it as they go. So yeah, even if anyone has any experience with getting take back clauses worked in, that'd be fantastic to hear as well. And I'm happy to share anything over the course of this project. If we come up with anything, more than happy to share it with the rest of the group.
What I'll try and do before this conversation finishes, I'll try and find the section in our ITT that dealt with that, and I'll copy and paste it into the comments.
That's brilliant, Peter. Thanks.
Right.
And I can circulate to everyone at the end with the minutes and the recording as well.
Thanks. Yeah, and I don't know if we can check about the Zero Waste Scotland guide. I don't know if that covered hiring furniture, if that was more sort of reupholstering and remanufacturing furniture, but that's perhaps something that is not actually ready to be published yet, but we can check on that.
Yeah, I can check with Claire, and again, I can include that with the resources after the meeting.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jill. Okay, does anyone else have any kind of points on that? I've got another little poll here, so it's another kind of theme that sort of comes up in this policy note. Okay, we pop that up on the screen now. So yes, just another simple yes or kind of no. Okay, if everyone's had a chance to answer that, we'll see what the results are. Okay, that's quite positive. Okay, so we're saying here that 67% do have cross-functional kind of or cross-organizational discussions on topics relating to climate change and circular economy. So does anyone want to share kind of how they work within their organization on so particularly, I don't know, there's kind of specific things like setting timelines for emissions. How do you work in your institution in terms of bringing together, I guess, the different experts and different people with kind of that should be involved in those conversations? No. Does anyone have any, if anyone has any, comments on anything around that kind of theme they want to add, please feel free. I know that, I suppose a lot of institutions have, some form of a sustainability committee. So I don't know if that's the kind of the forum that people use to kind of have those discussions with, with different departments. Eleanor, and Peter, you're both saying.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, we do have a sustainability committee, and we try and have people from across professional services and academics on that. In terms of procurement, we have a responsible and ethical procurement group. Again, that has academics, professional services, legal. It kind of covers quite a lot. one thing with that is just finding people. So we did a call out for academics a while back on social value, and an academic came forward with really keen on circular economy and really good on social value. So we're getting her in. So it's just networking with as many people as possible. One thing we find with that group is that I think we're reevaluating where it's going to go, because especially with emissions coming into it, that's a new expertise, a new field for procurement. So yeah, we kind of got a lot of the people that we want. It's just developing that when procurement's such a big topic, really, if that makes sense.
Peter, yeah.
Yeah, we've got an executive sustainable steering group, which was probably formed about 12 months ago. As I mentioned before, you know, we're running fast to catch up on this, and we've got some quite serious initiatives in place. The steering group covers pretty much everything. We have executive board on there, we have academics on there, certainly our head of sustainability is on there, and we also have representation from all the faculties and all the other professional services, and also the students play a very big part in that, particularly their representation with the student union, but they also introduced People and Planet, Extinction Rebellion. You know, they're all welcome to the conversation because they've all got valid points, and I think that environment actually encourages discussion, whereas before there was probably more conflict than there was discussion, or more, should we say, lobbying or knocking on closed doors, I think is probably the best way of describing it. Now it's far more collaborative, and we're getting some very, very good progress, and we're getting some good initiatives going on and it's spreading across. All sorts of other stuff that sort of feeds out of that is things like historic practices, particularly in the States area, where, you know, we may have long-term maintenance schedules that are basically sort of replacing gas boilers with gas boilers and oil boilers with oil boilers. We're running a program now where, okay, so the vast majority of them are break fix, so we have to replace them quickly. But what we should be doing is modelling what it would look like with alternative means like air source and so on, and look at how that looks like in the full life cycle cost of thing. And it's about education. So we're working very hard to sort of demonstrate what the art of the possible is, and then try and move people across from that.
Thanks, Peter. They're really interesting points. Yeah, I know that this is something, I guess, it's you know, it can be challenging to get the right people on board, I suppose, for these discussions, but particularly it's becoming yeah, I guess it's becoming increasingly important. There's increasingly sort of political pressure and, you know, pressure from this kind of student body as well to kind of really work you know, collaboratively and actually, you know, be able to deliver. I guess it's not just a case of having the strategy or the policy, it's actually working at the action plan and working out how you're going to get to, you know, whatever your target is, I suppose, for emissions reductions or kind of net zero targets. Would anyone else like to kind of comment on anything about, you know, how they work in their institution, on kind of these topics, how you get the right people involved, or any challenges you face? Elaine? Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to say we set up our sustainability steering group just last year. Well, probably just the tail end of the year before, and but unfortunately with COVID, we've had to pause some of the work that we were doing. So we were doing well probably up until about June time last year, and then the decision was taken because of workload and all that just to pause it. There's still some stuff going on in the background, but our steering group is made up of a real cross section of people. So there's academics, there's students, and we've been set specific tasks. So there's small work groups coming off of that. So it's really exciting, but it had to be paused. And we got what I think really set this off and has helped is that our senior vice principal is really interested in sustainability, and we didn't have that before. we really lacked that. We'd no leadership, we had no champion, and bringing him into the university has made such a difference from the sustainability agenda. And then, of course, we also launched that new Sustainability Aberdeen 2040, and that came from the new principle. So I think it's just been a change of personalities, and they've got different agendas, and that's been the force behind making this high profile where it wasn't before.
I think to sort of add on that, we've got quite great high level support at Strathclyde, but I think in Glasgow we've also got the benefit of COP. So if you use that magic word in any email to any department and any person, they're all very aware that we need to be all over it. So there's automatic buy-in. So we're trying to capitalise on that as much as we can to get these sort of networks set up and get these sort of partnerships going, so we can deliver as much before COP, but then have some kind of legacy afterwards where these working groups carry on and we keep pushing with it. So that's been an absolute brilliant thing to spur on a lot of work. I think as well, working from home to a certain extent has probably helped build a lot of the relationships we didn't necessarily have before. I think that sort of the barriers of working in different buildings, for example, is completely broken down now. It's, well, we have Zoom meetings internally, so we can have Zoom meetings with other departments as well. So I think people are more willing to meet now than necessarily they would have been while on campus, which is a bit of a strange side effect of COVID. So yes, certainly trying to build on that while we can.
Great, thank you, Scott. Does anyone have any other points on that? Or David at St Andrews? Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got an environmental sustainability board which has formed since December 2019, and all through last year has been working, putting a sustainability strategy together. It's got working groups underneath it, so it's got an energy, a state energy and environment working group, an operational adaptation working group, and under that there are spokes. There's a travel spoke, a procurement spoke, and there's 4 spokes, and a digital spoke and a development spoke for sustainability. And then we've got sustainability in the curriculum and research, and then student and community working groups. So the procurement group feeds back up to operational adaptation, which feeds into the main environmental board. So we're busy furiously putting policy stuff together, because we've got the goal of net zero by 2035, which has now gone through our governance process, but we're now going how do we do it, what are we measuring, what are we looking at.
Thanks, David. Okay. There was kind of one more sort of theme and little poll we were going to cover, but actually it kind of is more talking about tools, and Rika's next kind of presentation is looking at the HESCET tool, so we can kind of, bring up any points on tools around that discussion. So if anyone has, anything particular, comments on that policy note, any of the themes, that we haven't sort of discussed that they want to sort of point out just now, then please feel free. Otherwise, if you want to have a read of it, the link is included in the agenda, and I think it's up on, you can get access to it from the Sustainability Exchange. But it's worth a read. It's very broad, and I'm sure a lot of this, although this is kind of targeted to the sort of Scottish public sector bodies, it's obviously very applicable for across the kind of the UK, a lot of these themes. Please, we will move on unless there are any kind of final sort of comments. Okay, I don't see any hands up or anything, so I think, Rika, we will move on to your presentation on HESCET.
Sure, thanks very much, Kate. I'll keep it brief because we're a bit over time, which is good because it just means that we've had a good discussion. I'm just going to share my screen again. So I prepared a really brief kind of presentation on the HESCA tool, which is called HESCA tool 3.4. Again, not entirely sure where the 3.4 comes from, but it's just an updated HESCA tool. Some of you might remember that Stephen Connor was presented on the HESCA tool in May 2020, so like a year ago. So I'm not going to go into any detail of figures or anything like that. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what has changed. So the tool was developed about 6-7 years ago to enable a relatively consistent form of reporting of procurement scope 3 emissions within the further and higher education sector. Now, it had originally been developed by Arup using the DEFRA spend-based methodology to calculate and estimate like the annual procurement emissions. So overall, it's just a simple form of calculating scope 3 emissions based on institutional non-pay spend. So that's PROC-AG, or some institutions in England also using the UNSPSC codes. The data is being used for the EMR reports, so the estate management reporting, which then needed to be broken down into the HESA categories. HESA stands for the Higher Education Statistics Agency, lots of acronyms, and it can also obviously be used for your public bodies climate change duty reporting and PBCCD reporting. Usually it's just universities who've been doing the EMR reports, but obviously colleges can use this as well. There are other ways you can use any of the information, and in relation to the SPPN as well, it might give you a good indication of where your carbon emissions are sitting within the procurement spend. Just a quick overview on the HESA categories. I'm not going to go into detail because we don't have enough time for that. And the scopes, I think you're all aware of the different scopes, so direct emissions, indirect emissions, as well as scope 3, which is like the indirect emissions from procurement. Again, we don't really have time to go into the detail, but I just wanted to kind of talk to you quickly about the review process of the HESCA tool. It started about a year ago, and it was a working group which was UK-wide, so not just Scotland, but from kind of managed the EAUC as well, and HEPA, and we've been discussing with DEFRA, well, with people from the University of Leeds who put the DEFRA, who updated the DEFRA codes. We got in touch and we discussed and reviewed the tool. Now, there were different stages to it because there has also been an update in the PROC-AG codes, so there are more codes now and more DEFRA codes. The DEFRA codes themselves for the tool hadn't changed since they've been last been updated in 2009. So you can imagine that they're quite out of date because the DEFRA codes back in the day, they were limited in their focus and limited in what kind of was taken into account when providing the data. So now changes within the new DEFRA codes include like materials and methods of production, and in some cases also logistical methods of delivery that have changed drastically. And I think one of the most important factors as well is that it's not just UK, EU and rest of the world, but it's actually kind of geographically more split out. So it makes a difference, and overall the number of categories has increased from 75 to 311. Having said that, 311 is could technically be shortened as well, because there are categories which are split into different areas which actually just have the same DEFRA factors against, like carbon factors against it. So it didn't really need to be split out into an additional category. You will notice that if you take these things year by year, that they will make a difference. And I think that's quite important to note that it's not just a continuation of it. It makes quite a different change in the outcome. What's important as well is that the functionality of the tool has not changed. So I can show you the tool, but it hasn't really changed. It's just you still put in your PROC-AG spend, and it comes at the end with a HESA result, HESA categorized results out of it. You can access the tool by using the HEPA form, but also the EAUC provides a copy as well. again, I'm not going to go into very much detail here. I'm going to go into the detail of caveats and restrictions on the tool at the end, because I really just want to very briefly show you what APUC have done as well with their carbon emissions report. So we have a Scope 3 emissions report that is basically doing exactly what the HESCA tool is doing, but a bit more direct, and then can split it down a little bit more into greater detail that I personally think is going to be more helpful. So in addition to the updated HESCA tool, we've also included the DEFRA factors in our spend information tool. That is available via the contract uptake website. So the DEFRA factors, as they're mirrored against, as they are mapped against the PROC-AG and the HESCA tool, it's the same thing in the APUC Scope 3 emissions report. So I don't want to go into much detail how much time it took and what kind of conversation went on in the background to kind of map the PROC-AG against DEFRA. It's not really important. Important is that if you can use the HESCA tool, or you can use the information on the contract uptake website and the Scope 3 emissions report that is against your spend information, and it should give you the same information. However, it allows you, the APUC Scope 3 emissions report allows you to further break it down by supplier. So you can see it then by estate, by category, and then by further PROC-AG code like catering or utilities, and then you can even go into the supplier, so you can understand where your highest emissions are sitting and who you maybe want to target. So Scott mentioned earlier that they're looking at the top 10 areas, and then maybe suppliers as well. So you could do that. You could do something similar, as in looking at your high carbon emission areas, and then really go into the detail of the specific commodity that you might want to look at. Don't know how well you can see this. This is kind of just an example. So this is estates, and breaks it down into utilities, travel and transport, estates and buildings, or catering. And then I open up catering further, and then it gives me the split into meat, poultry, offal, or groceries, or dairy produce, etc., etc. And I can open it up further, and then I get the supplier names that are falling under that, and the carbon emissions associated with the spend. Again, just keeping it brief, this gives you a better overview. If you're interested in looking at it, also for the English institutions, I think your consortia should have a report. They should be able to send you this report if you have provided the spend on the contract uptake website. That's my understanding. For any APUC organisations, that is definitely available if spend has been provided. And if you have any questions on the back of it, how to get this report, just send me a message and I'll get you in touch with eSolutions so you can get it. On both of the systems, I think we should really briefly discuss and maybe get feedback on the caveats, or what it does and doesn't do. So again, the updated course will have an impact on the previous report results, so keep that in mind. There's a limitation, obviously, on the usefulness of the tool because it's a spend-based tool. So there's an assumption of, if you have a higher spend, there's a higher emission, because it doesn't necessarily break it down to purchasing of a car in general and purchasing of an electric car, or use of the car over 5 years and use of the car over 10 years. It does make a difference in between, like using a second-hand car over purchasing a second-hand car over purchasing a new car. It also implies that your spend as a supplier is correctly coded against the PROC-AG code, because obviously it doesn't go into the line item detail. So whether or not you bought, if you use a catering supplier from which you buy dairy products and vegetables and meat-based products, it will all just be one code, rather than having it split down into the 3 different areas. So it relies very much on it being coded correctly. And then there is the problem as well in the DEFRA codes. Not just want to say there are problems with it, but there's also not just the coding of your supplier to the correct PROC-AG and PROC-AG2 code, but also the directly mapping of the DEFRA codes against the PROC-AG code. And unfortunately, there was a shift in the DEFRA codes from being quite industrial to more of a domestic focus, meaning that you don't, whereas you previously had a construction DEFRA code, you now don't really have a construction DEFRA code anymore. So that kind of limits how you're going to map DEFRA against PROC-HE. So it's not always one-to-one. And lastly, the HESA categories that I've kind of just touched upon are kind of flown over. They are not necessarily in our sector relevant. So sometimes it's just title, others are like, do we need to just split out paper products, or could we put that into just manufactured products, etc. Whilst there could be other categories that might be a bit more useful for you to split it out in. But overall, it is a good tool to get an overview of where your emissions are sitting, and where the high priority areas or high risk areas are lying. And again, with the APUC tool, you can really drill down up to supplier level to understand that there is a supplier in there where you have a high emission against your spend. So you might want to investigate with those suppliers how potentially emissions can be reduced on either like line item level or even just on a general scope of what they're producing. I think we should have a quick few minutes of discussing this, or like asking questions or getting feedback from other like from group members here, because I know it's quite a topic everyone is interested in, and everyone is kind of fighting for a solution on how to actually report scope 3, because that is the most difficult question I think in the room. Helene is, as she said, like newly part of the CPF group, the Climate and Procurement Forum for Monitoring and Reporting, and it is a rabbit hole. Oh, sorry, David is as well, as long as he's still with us. 21 more days, but it is a rabbit hole. It's very hard to put your finger on something, and we hope within that group to develop something for the sector, for the public sector in general, but it isn't as straightforward as one might want it to be. Any questions or comments or anything you want to say? I would say give it a couple of minutes and then move on with the others. Martin, yes.
Hi, yeah, no, I was at a College Development Network meeting yesterday, and I think it's Angus Warren mentioned a couple of things. So it's a specific question relating to what he mentioned, because I wasn't able to follow up on it. He said that there's something coming in April as far as colleges are concerned, as far as the HESCET tool, I'm assuming, because he was saying we were going to get our emissions. I know we're meeting next week to discuss this to some extent, but there are obviously other colleges in the room here, so it might be useful. I guess where do colleges sit within this, Scottish colleges, that is, in terms of the sort of in this case, A, the HESCET tool, and B, that relating to the public body's dutying. I wasn't really wanting to go into the sort of application of how we actually then reduce our the footprint from scope 3, just the sort of first steps.
So colleges don't have to report the EMR reports, but you obviously have access to the tool, the HESCET tool as well, so you can use it for your own internal reporting, or your annual procurement report if you want to point out anything in there. But also, and the deadline for that has moved to April, so that it wasn't as before January, February. That's now moved because the tool was obviously delayed, and they're requesting to get the information from the new tool. In regards to the Scope 3 emissions report, that is basically available to any APUC institutions that have provided the spend information. So that isn't university or college, it's all of the APUC members. And as I say, like even English consortia members who have provided that spend to eSolutions / the contract uptake website, so that's available. And as I say, like I think it's more important for you to maybe see how you can use that information internally, and maybe within your annual procurement report, or for your PVCCD reporting. But yeah, that's really what it is for you, rather than for universities who have to report the EMR returns. And I hope that that's what he meant. I can check with him.
Eleanor, yeah.
Hey, yeah, sorry. So I might have missed something. So please do correct me. But I was looking at the report that SUPC provided us with the new conversion, And I noticed that it has the year-on-year conversion rate, but because it's not been updated for a few years, I wondered if there was a neat little resource that has direct before and after.
So I think the year on year is actually now with the updated ones. So you see maybe 2018, 2019, 2019, 2020, and that's actually the updated ones for the previous years as well. So that doesn't mean that the 2018, 2019 is a 2009 version that's already been updated, but it took so long to be updated that you only now see it. And that's what we mean with the results might differ. So when you see your results from 2018-19 previously done, they will differ from the new ones that you've been receiving in that new report handed to you by SUPC.
Awesome, thank you. I knew there was going to be some simple answer.
Perfect.
Tool for us has been incredibly useful. So essentially part of the legwork of the project that we started was dissecting the HESKIT tool and then working out from there, okay, so this is our top 10 impact areas, this was the spend, and then it was a back and forward with procurement trying to work out what suppliers went into that category. APUC tool, on the other hand, lets us just look at that immediately. So the step that we're now working on is, for example, taking those top areas of spend, looking at the top 2 or 3 suppliers within each of those categories, and liaising with procurement to get a category report from those suppliers directly. So the likes of Lyrico, Bunzel, etc. The big sort of framework suppliers that are large amounts of spend are then giving us line by line reports that we can begin to dissect and start to look at, well, are there other products we could have looked at instead? Are we over ordering? Is it a case of wastage? And how we can start to influence it. So at the moment, a lot of the work we're looking at is what's the next step here? How do we start to influence that? We've probably gone, instead of doing a holistic, this is how we're going to calculate our total scope 3 procurement emissions and this is how it'll work, we've probably gone directly for actually how can we start to influence that. I think as our understanding develops, we'll start to look at a more holistic, so this is our scope 3 procurement overall, and this is the system we're using to assess that. But just now, to get some quick wins, we're looking directly at what are the bigger impact areas and what can we do to start influencing that, just so we can get some wins out of the door very early on. But the tool has been fantastically useful for that. It's cut out so much legwork.
Good. Glad to hear, Scott. Thanks for that feedback as well. I think we need to be mindful. I think the work you're doing is great, Scott, and I think it's really valuable. And I think others will probably, hopefully, start doing the same. I should point out that after you've done that in the next year, the tool is not going to give you accurate information on how much you've reduced, because it's obviously just on spend, whilst you might swap products which are lower in carbon emissions. The tool will not necessarily show you that, because you might spend just as much money on this, or you might even spend a wee bit more money. So the tool then can't really be used to demonstrate the reduction.
Absolutely, yeah. Part of it has been looking at what are the limitations of this as well. So we're looking at our for those sort of top hitter suppliers, for example, do they have any strategies or policies in place? For example, what's their sourcing? So how are they already influencing their carbon footprint, and what sector-specific systems are in place that they could adopt, and we could encourage them to start looking at. So it's given us that sort of overview that we can start to look at it. It's given us a great starting point. But yeah, like you say, there's a lot of caveats and things to consider before you can really take it and run with it.
Fab, thank you so much, Scott. Are there any other questions or comments? Otherwise, I would give back to Kate to do the last couple of items on the agenda. And I think, Jill, you have an item as well. Otherwise, just come back. Happy to take any questions by email. I think Jill's probably including my email as well.